Let's do that again.
Okay, now we're starting virtual. Good afternoon. Welcome to the Charleston Jung Society's first online live streamed event. I'm Betsy Grund. I serve as the president of the CJS board, and I sincerely wish we could welcome you here in Gage Hall in person as we have for the last 10 years. For now, we're grateful to have you joining us on any platform, and we thank you for being here. Being with others who are interested in the potential of Jung's work for healing and encouraging wholeness is what CJS is all about. It's been 6 months since we had to postpone our March event, so we're ready and we'll dive right in. First with Jennifer Santoro, CJS board member and life coach. She will be followed by Preston Sachs, and I will follow Preston. If and when you'd like to pose a question or a comment, please do so. We'll get to as many of them as we can, either between the sections or when we've all completed our remarks. Jen?
Hi everyone, it's so good to be connected with you. It's been too long is how it feels. And so today what I wanted to bring forward as we were discussing as a board of what we could explore tonight is how Carl Jung's work has provided a great foundation for us and provided many tools for us to navigate such a unique time in history. Let's face it, 2020 has been a very, I'm going to use the word interesting year. Try to be a little bit neutral with it as much as I can, right? But with that, I do want to honor the fact that it has been a huge year of change thus far. And what I want to do is take some time with you to discuss how and honor the fact of how change affects us. And what I want to bring attention to for us tonight is how we are actual individuals and we respond to change very individually, right? All of us have different personality types and, we experience the world around us in a unique way to us, according to our own stories, and then also too, just in general, how we manage our energy. And so one of the tools that I wanted to offer for us as a society to, explore this evening is a tool that was not developed by Carl Jung himself, but was inspired by Carl Jung's work. And that is the MBTI, Myers-Briggs assessment. And in particular, the two sides that Carl Jung's work actually inspired, which is how we take in information and how we perceive it, and then how we organize that information, and he used and come to explicit conclusions. Carl Jung used the word judging in that, so how we judge the situation. And then also too, how we manage, to observe the world around us through extroversion and introversion. So one of the pieces of training that I was exposed to along the way that I really enjoyed is the thought process that we actually are all sides of the spectrum. We're all of it, right? So, but what the key is understanding what we're more drawn to and what we're more comfortable with. And so I bring this up to say is that in change, usually that will invoke some level of stress. And so what I want to encourage us all to do is to take the time to self-reflect. If anything, 2020 has definitely been a year that has offered us the invitation to do that. And so with that, what I want to ask us to consider doing is thinking about when we do feel the stresses coming, and as we are making sense of the world around us, look to see ourselves first, because we when it comes to this is a thought process that, we can't always control the situations that are around us. However, we can control our perception and we can control how we manage our own energy. And so with that, we can self-check along the way. So if there are times where we feel that high stress coming on, let's take that step back and think about for ourselves and reflect on, okay, well, where am I on the spectrum right now? And am I giving too much energy, right? Like, you say like the visualization of having a cup, right? And are we constantly giving? And so our cup is empty, right? So if that ends up being the case, how do we take that step back to take that self-care moment to recognize, okay, how do I fill my own cup? So for example, if we're more on the introverted side and we're stimulated by watching a lot of television, or this was a case for me, I was in quarantine for a really long time, right? And then all of a sudden, I found myself in a situation where I was starting to go venture out into the world again, right? Going to the grocery store. And it was so intense. It was a lot of stimulation. And I had to just take that moment to honor it for myself. And got what I needed, but then removed myself, but then did something that was just by myself, just to self-check and kind of get into that realignment, right? So that's just an example, because all I can do is share my own experience right now, right? But then on top of that, what I would love to do is encourage us as a community to come together to support each other. So when we are communicating with each other and we feel the stresses of change coming, how can we, ask questions of each other to help us navigate our ways through these times, right? We're going into so many unknowns, right? But that is part of life. And Carl Jung has offered us so much to be able to be reflecting upon to help guide us through. And so I just brought up the Myers-Briggs as one tool that we can utilize as a self-checkpoint of, okay, if I'm more on this side, and this is where I get my energy from, let me go towards there so I can readjust and get my energy back up to feel back into alignment in these uncertain times. However, though, like you're saying, there's so much richness in the work of Carl Jung. And so what I want to encourage us to do is, as a society, let's communicate with each other, whether it's here on this YouTube channel or through email or however we want to be connected in these virtual environments for the time being. But let's support each other and send each other, different tools that, we can utilize and reflect upon as we go deeper into this work that we're called to, whatever that is for us as individuals. So I just wanted to set the tone for us this evening, right? It's like we're going to be going into some heavier topics, right, of exploring what this year has been. So as we're doing that, what we want to do is just kind of start with, okay, let's start with the self. We can control us, that's where it starts, right? Lay that foundation, let's continue to explore, let's continue to support each other. And so without further ado, let's start to dive deeper into our reflections for these past 6 months or so. And I'm going to hand it over to Preston to do that.
Well, thank you so much, Jen. Can you just check to see if anyone has any comments?
Yes, absolutely.
Any questions for you before I get going with this?
So far, we're good. You can
Great.
go right in.
All right, so yeah, I'm Preston Sachs, and I'd like to start with my own reflections because I had actually contracted COVID-19, but also to talk about this virus and the pandemic in terms of what it means on a Jungian level, what it means from the collective unconsciousness. So back in the first week of March, I was a really busy guy. I was working full time, volunteered, I had a toddler, and I felt on top of the world. I mean, I was celebrating buying a new house, and I was at a restaurant called Prohibition, and I was urging the Charleston Jung Society to let's have the March event anyway, let's just do it. Because I thought, here in Gage Hall, what are the chances? Charleston, we're away from it, epicenters. Let's get one last one in before everything gets shut down. But I didn't realize that would be the last meal at a restaurant I would have for months before I was prohibited from doing so again. And I didn't realize that we weren't going to have another Jung Society presentation in person. And I didn't realize that the new house that I had gotten would become my quarantine fortress, where we would all just be hanging out a lot. Like someone just waving a magic wand, the whole world just stopped on a dime. The routine ended, and I just thought to myself, what does this mean? I wonder wondered why had the collective unconscious manifested this worldwide pandemic. And Jung said from Psychology and Religion, how thin are the walls which separate a world ordered, lurking in chaos. But it's the same with the individual in his rationally ordered world, seeking revenge for his violence that his reason had done to her. Outraged nature only awaits the moment when the partition falls so as to overwhelm the conscious life with destruction. Let me break that down just a little bit. Outraged nature, Carl Jung said, outraged nature is seeking revenge for the violence that our reason has done to her. Is she speaking to us now? Is nature overwhelming the conscious life with destruction? Is she trying to help us reunite the conscious, rational mind with the unconscious and reestablish a relationship with her? So let me talk about my experience with the disease first, because as above, so is below. So as the effects of the pandemic came through Charleston, I didn't want to think much of it. Charleston, surely not going to be a hot spot for this disease. But what are the chances that I would get it? I mean, but even so, I was deemed an essential worker. I had a senior citizen mother-in-law living with me. I wanted to protect her. So I was very, very careful. I only went to work, at the supermarket, and home. But the supermarket was one of the few places that my toddler and I could go that wasn't, we would go to the playground, but then it gets hot in Charleston. Where could we go when we couldn't do the normal activities we love to do? So we would go to the supermarket. And I'm pretty sure he got it at the supermarket. And I was dutiful. I would wipe down the cart before I put him in, always wore a mask. But one night, my wife noticed that my toddler had a runny nose. And then the next night, my wife felt like she was getting a cold. And then the next night, I felt lightheaded, like my mind was splitting from my body. And I went to bed early that night. And the next morning, I woke up feeling hot. My wife said I did feel hot. And I took my temperature, and it was a really small fever, 100.5. So I called work. They told me to go to the doctor, and I took some aspirin. And I went to the doctor. But by the time I had arrived, I didn't have a fever anymore. And they sent me home. They said, if I have a fever tomorrow, come back. But you don't have any symptoms. You're not presenting with any symptoms. So no test. When I called work, they told me I had to go back. I had to go and get tested. So reluctantly, I returned the next day, feeling sick, but not awful, to the clinic. I just wanted to get back to work. I just wanted them to tell me I could go back to work because I felt guilty that other people were going to have to pick up the slack at work. How American, right? To want to go to work when you're sick. Our society makes us go to work. So the clinic gave me a flu test along with the COVID test because, it had to be the flu. It couldn't be COVID. How could it possibly be COVID? And they said, call work, tell them I was going to be out for at least a week, and it was 2 weeks if I had COVID. But of course I said, I'll be back in a couple days. Don't worry, we'll be fine. It's just the flu. I'll get over it. But then I got the call. I was positive, and I felt worse calling in that day, telling them I wasn't going to be at work for 2 weeks than I did from the disease. But I was worried. I was worried to think I was trying to get out of work, but no, I really had it. So my thoughts were, are you serious? I was careful. It had to be flu, something I ate. But my wife and I got sicker. We were on our backs for 5 days or so, just unable to move. Our toddler was not so sick, and thank God this disease doesn't affect children and toddlers. So he wanted to play, and he was really annoying, but we loved him, and we were really glad he wasn't sick, but we did not want to play. But as I recovered, more and more thoughts turned to what this illness meant on a deeper level. What did it say about our society? I'm incredibly blessed to be relatively young and relatively healthy. I'm blessed to have a job that lets me take paid sick time off. I'm blessed to have health insurance that covers the cost of my tests and would have covered the hospitalization cost too if my family needed it. I'm blessed that the disease spares the youngest of us and doesn't affect children. I wondered how others who were affected would go. who weren't as lucky as I was. So in America, we have this healthcare system where it's tied to your job. Having insurance is tied to your job. And what happens when entire industries shut down overnight? What happens when you lose your job in a pandemic and you don't have insurance anymore? What happens when you get sick? What does this say about our society? Is our society sick too? Is this disease an opportunity for us to reimagine and re-examine our healthcare system? Edgar Cayce once said, "Spirit is life, mind is builder, physical is the result." So go back to Carl Jung. He said that the experience of sickness, torture, death, but also regeneration implies at a higher level the idea of being made whole through sacrifice, of being changed by some transubstantiation and being exalted into a spiritual person, apotheosis. What Jung is saying is that we become our highest selves amid terrible hardships and that sacrifice is required. This disease is the sacrifice that we have. Giving up the life that we were living, where every day was busy, every day was full of growth, every day. Is this disease bringing chaos so we can set a new order? When we recover, will our society rethink how we care for those who want to work but can't? People who would have had health insurance but don't. People who need not have died but did. What does it say about the world order, built as it is on never-ending growth and consumption? What was the cause of this disease? So the direct cause, the physical cause of COVID-19 was because of destruction of habitats and hunting of exotic animals for bushmeat. But the psychic cause was the destruction of nature and the Anthropocene changes humans are making to our global environment. It was outraged nature, as Jung described her wrath seeking vengeance for that violence our reasonable and rational minds have done to her. Outraged nature, only waiting for the moment when the partition falls, so as to overwhelm the conscious life with destruction. So the times we live in now, they remind me of the plagues in Egypt during the Exodus story. So for Jewish people in the Passover story, it's about slavery. It's about slavery represented by the Pharaoh and Egypt. And then the redemption and then freedom in the Promised Land. And when each plague afflicted Egypt and the Egyptian people, nothing was done by the Egyptian people or Pharaoh to solve the root cause of the plagues. They just let the Israelites go. They just changed their society to give others freedom. Just as the Egyptians didn't free the Israelites when their cattle became diseased, neither did we change our consumption practices, where factory farms led to bird flu and swine flu and factory farming. Just as the Egyptians did not free the Israelites when locusts descended upon their crops, we never stopped climate change, which just caused a 900 square mile swarm of locusts to cover Africa in February. Just as the Egyptians did not free the Israelites when they lived in darkness and wild beasts were among them, we have not stopped the wildfires that forced power companies to turn off the lights, leaving us in darkness and driving wild beasts into our town squares. I recently learned about Midrash. That's a rabbinic commentary. And that said that in the Hebrew, in the Exodus 8:6, said the plague was not of frogs, plural, frogs, but it was the plague of the frog, singular. Rabbi Akiva said, there was one frog, one giant frog. Now the other rabbis thought it was crazy, but he said, no, God would not put the singular form of frog, unless he meant there was only one frog. And he said that whenever the Egyptians came to fight off this one frog, it would just multiply and multiply into more frogs. And I think metaphorically, that has a lot of resonance for us. In an article I read from Evan Wolkenstein, he said that one frog, he said that the Egyptians would attack the problem in front, but not address the root cause, which made the situation worse. And what he said was, think of an oil spill. We should fight, we should work to clean up the oil spill. But more importantly, we need to work on the root causes, our own consumption, our own dependence on fossil fuels, which made the tanker necessary to begin with, so we can eliminate the cause. The Egyptians should have just let the Israelites go. We need to examine why we consume and pollute so much, why we destroy the world. We need to prevent that one frog, that one problem, from multiplying. Of course, in the Exodus story, the Israelites aren't freed, not until the death of the firstborn is inflicted on the Egyptians. It was only when the next generation perished that they took heed. With nature's mercy, this pandemic, it's sparing children almost entirely. But do we need the same punishment that the Egyptians did to save the natural world? What happens when the next plague that comes down on us, volleyed at us by nature, what happens when it does kill the children? What lessons will we learn now? What actions will we take now to spare the world from nature's wrath? Jung said, by composing the unstable, by bringing order unto chaos, by resolving disharmonies and centering upon a midpoint, consciousness is reunited with unconsciousness. The unconscious man is made one with his center, which is also the center of the universe. And it's this wise goal that brings mankind salvation and exaltation is reached. I hope humanity finds itself amid the chaos. And I hope it's able to reunite our disconnected consciousness with the unconscious to reconcile our relationship with nature. And hopefully, like the Israelites, we can leave our psychic bondage, our Pharaoh in Egypt land, and in 40 years, after we've died trekking in the desert, hopefully the next generation will see the promised land. Is there any comments, questions? Okay, great. Betsy.
All right. Wow. Thinking about whether maybe there's more than one or two pandemics. Maybe we've got more on our hands. But for tonight, the second pandemic we're navigating is systemic racism. It's a reality that in many ways has been hiding in plain sight. The recent and ongoing killings of Black people by police have permeated our collective and personal consciousness and demand our presence with them. Now we witness these horrors on our screens, sometimes as they are happening. George Floyd, Sandra Bland, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, Jacob Blake, Daniel Prude, Walter Scott, to name only a few lives lost among many, many too many. Each death is a new shock to our personal and collective systems. Along with these deaths, we're also presented with more images of the everyday brutality of systemic racism. And remember that it too often hides from us in plain sight. As with COVID-19, we are forced to acknowledge once again that something larger than us is in charge. What was hidden in plain sight is now painfully obvious, and the silence has been broken. There is a new opportunity to consider what is being revealed and what its relationship is to us. A Jungian perspective reminds us to respect unconscious forces and their potential for creating and destroying and revealing and hiding. With our collective life permeated by issues of race, bias, and fairness, it is a good time to get curious and examine ourselves and our world anew. The cost of neglecting these issues is increasingly apparent. Jung's work has much to offer. Jungian analyst Dr. Fanny Brewster has written and teaches about the racial complex. She has broken new ground in Jungian psychology, and her work has helped to break the silence by expanding Jungian conversation about race. Like any complex, the implications of the racial complex are enormous for our personal and collective lives. As Dr. Brewster reminds us, complexes are part of us, and they don't go away. My personal image of a complex, which has come to me in dreams, is that of an enormous parking garage, concrete parking garage. The image helps me to remember what I am and what we are up against as we work to reveal and transform these heavy, seemingly inert structures in our psyches. Our best hope for a healthy relationship with them is to expand our perspectives and try to discern their impact on our beliefs and choices. Dr. Brewster points to the shadow as the archetype, the core archetype of the racial complex. When our shadow aspects are activated, the dispossessed, neglected parts of ourselves, can be projected onto others in the world. We might see our projected selves on the police, on the victims, on the protesters, on the rioters, and or any of the characters with whom we wouldn't normally identify ourselves. Just as we cannot deny the brutality we're seeing in the killings of Black people, we also must admit that we too are capable of treating each other and ourselves with brutality. The heightened emotions and energy we experience when we see these projections, this is our cue to pay attention. That energy reminds us that archetypal forces are at work in us and around us. When we see the clue, often it is experienced as a bodily sensation. There is an opportunity to respond in a way that increases consciousness and is healing. By allowing ourselves to be curious, watch ourselves and others with open minds, we might use the information to focus effort on examining and withdrawing projections, befriending complexes, and integrating the denied and dispossessed parts of ourselves. Putting attention on the content of our dreams, our waking life, and our own imagination has potential to expand our consciousness and our freedom from the fragmentation and conflict within and without, personally and collectively. We may not be consciously aware of suffering, either our own or others, because it has been cut off from our awareness. But that doesn't mean we're not impacted by our biases or that our biases don't impact others. In fact, the less we are aware of our own biases, the more likely it is they will be reflected in our behaviors and attitudes. We are wired for connection, and regardless of who we are as individuals, the loss and trauma caused by hatred and brutality in our midst can stop us in our tracks. Self-analysis is a start, but our ability to recognize and transform hidden biases and expand beyond them is especially vulnerable to the cleverness of our defenses. Psyche wants to maintain the status quo. Those parking garages are complicated structures, and getting to know their shadowy corners is a big job. Our defenses will protect us. At the same time, the power of dreams and other Jungian tools and practices can help us reveal the defenses in healthy ways so that we can be challenged and grow. Analysis with others and collective scrutiny are critical. When archetypal dynamics are unconscious to us, our choices are limited. We see the world through a filter of personality, experiences, hurts, complexes, and with our very human need to make sense of new input, we categorize the data based on what we already know. And our habit is to see what we expect to see. It's a wonder we learn anything at all, but we do. And now is our job to open the lens wider and to be willing, as Jung was, to consider every possibility as a legitimate reality. In one episode of the podcast, This Jungian Life, Deb, one of the analysts, mentions that the briefest description of Jung's perspective is simply, everything belongs. We can explore the nature, extent, and impact of unconscious biases and personal complexes through working with dreams, projections, and active imagination. When we are able to be present to these experiences, we can take responsibility for integrating unconscious aspects and enhance the process of individuation. So what can we do on a practical level? Because the damage is being done on the practical level. A Jungian perspective reminds us to be a witness to ourselves, our own actions and others' actions. We are reminded to be curious, to go slow, to stay with it, go deeper. When we can, we need to resist the temptation to look away and to question our justifications and our denials. We must take time to acknowledge the staggering losses and grieve them, to stay present and to hold the tension of the opposites. Allow your truth to reveal itself. It is an ongoing process. In a recent podcast, Dr. Brené Brown, brought up the hero's journey, that mythical path where we are invited to investigate and discern what is operating that is larger than us and that is also a part of us. Individually, we are all at various places in the journey. Like Jen said, some are called, some are denying the call, others are facing the obstacles head on, and few are on the way home. Collectively, Dr. Brown pointed out, we are in the messy middle. The part of the story where the hero hopes against hope that they won't have to be vulnerable to the overwhelming obstacle. It is the point where we try everything to go around, over, under, but we have to go through in order to face the thing and integrate in order to transform. In the messy middle, there are way more answers. Well, way more questions than answers. When we do find home again, it will likely be a place we've never been before. These dynamics are alive, deep within us, and they carry a heavy charge in collective life. With commitment, we will continue to engage the ongoing dynamics of racial and cultural complexes with the hope for healing. Before we go any further, I want to definitely say thank you for joining us, and also a personal and organizational thanks to Jen and Preston for being willing to dive in with me, with us. Larry Monteith is the man behind the camera, and he has learned a whole new platform and really shot for excellence, and hopefully that's what we're experiencing here. Also, we have two other board members, Linda Scott and Chris Cuniff, and they have provided invaluable support for tonight's work. So, do we have any comments?
Well, not yet, but I do want to let everybody know that if you'd like to put in comments or questions or add to the discussion, please feel free to do so in the chat box that's here on the YouTube channel. I have it right here, so we can add you into the conversation as we continue it going. Something that I do want to say is thank you to you both and to the entire board, and Betsy in particular for being, our leader of helping us get to this point of bringing the Carl Jung Society back together. This is, one of those times where, we're in the evolutionary process. And what I love about this tonight is that we're back in Gage Hall, and whether, the fact that we can't have everybody here in person, I'm so grateful that we're able to at least connect with everybody that's here. And what's wonderful is, we have a very good group that's on right now. So please feel free to keep coming in, and let's continue to the conversation as we normally would during a traditional event that we would be having. So one of our board members, Chris, has said, Preston, you mentioned one root cause of the pandemic, the damage we are doing to nature. Do any of us as panelists see any other possible root causes? And so, and Preston, if there's any more that you want to go into, and Betsy, if there's a response that you want to do of a root cause.
I just, when I was just contemplating the word virus and viral, and just to take a moment to think about what has gone viral in our lives collectively and personally. To me, I could spend some journaling time on that. Just, looking at the symbolism of some of these words, the opposites of social distancing or physical distancing, and, being connected, to whole nother hours of journaling, I think. There's a lot to contemplate.
Yeah, I think a really important aspect of this is, I think the world sort of needed a reset. Just kind of looking at some of the pictures of cities that were normally just covered in pollution, and seeing no pollution, the sky being clear, seeing the way traffic can be on a rush hour, and then seeing no traffic, and just kind of imagining and reimagining what life could be like if we didn't need so much. So why are we doing this hustle and bustle? Why are we struggling to drive hundreds of miles to do whatever it is we need to do, to commute to work, and all the hours we spend away from the people we love and care about? And for what? To get a little bit more stuff, to get a little more. So I wonder if the cause is all of us collectively just kind of needing a reset. And that's not to say that there isn't suffering here. But I think that sacrifice and suffering is required for us to be able to move on to something else.
Right. And actually, I thought something that was really fascinating. I had this reflection when we were all called to quarantine. And I was thinking to myself about how, some of the spiritual leaders that I have admired along, my life of studying them and their life's work and everything, how they went into isolation and did deep reflection, deep meditation. And I thought to myself, like, wow, what an interesting time to witness. I love the word that you used, Betsy, the witness aspect of this that we're called, like we are always called to do. But what a fascinating time to witness of how we as humanity, the entire world, when else have we all been called to isolate and reflect? And, there was I saw it as, I'm like, well, there's an opportunity here. Right. And so I agree that, maybe speculation, one of the root causes came from a much deeper level for us as humanity of what we are called, what we're calling forward, as a collective together. And earlier I mentioned about this importance of understanding our own individual selves in the midst of the collective, right? However, though, it's always an and. It's never like the or aspect of it's, it's we are individuals and we are the collective. And so being able to take that step back and decipher that and tease that out. I mean, I don't know when else in life I've been able to do that in the way that, our societies have evolved to, of what Preston was saying about we're on the go, at least in our, the culture that I grew up in, it's go, 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 go. So it was amazing to sit back and to see what happened, and then how different humans responded, right, to different ways of the effects of being in isolation. So one of my questions to everybody is, as we're witnessing what's happening, how do we make sense of that? And then how do we then come back to our individual selves for our own healing and our own reflections? So Anna Maria, she put in, how do we deal with the pervasive denial about the reality of this pandemic from a Jungian perspective? So I'll say that one more time about like, how are we going to deal with the pervasive denial about the reality of this pandemic?
I think that one of the most important things is to not deny their denial. I know that's kind of crazy, but people have a certain reality. I think, Betsy, you were saying that we have to acknowledge the realities that we have. And you have to acknowledge that you said that everything has a place in the world. Yeah. And people who are deniers have a place in the world too. Accept their reality for a minute. I think that if you let them fully live their reality and say, okay, there is no pandemic. What is it then? What is the world experiencing? What are you experiencing? Have a real conversation instead of immediately dismissing someone as, oh, this person's a crazy. No, they're a human being just like you. They're trying to make sense of this world just like you. So do your best to acknowledge that person, to love that person, and to remember that they're another part of the collective consciousness with you. They're another part of this universe with you. We're all made of the same stuff. Mm-hmm. And then maybe we can learn about something deep within them and deep within us that we share. Maybe that the fears that we have coming from this disease and this pandemic are very similar to the fears they have, but it's manifesting in a different way. So I would say acknowledge them, accept their reality. You don't have to believe it yourself, but accept their reality for a minute and try to have deep empathy for them.
And I love what you went to almost immediately, which was asking questions. One of the things that I have drawn on time and time again during the last 6 months with regard to Jung is reminding myself and saying to others, I know nothing. I know nothing about this dream. I know nothing about this reality. That beginning with questions, beginning with not judging, beginning with, if there's a strong reaction to some type of denial, that's that energy that I mentioned. And it's important to identify that energy because that is, I believe, a clue for us and a cue to look at ourselves also, so that we can connect with people in a way that's not judgmental and cutting their reality off. This is complicated stuff, but we do all have our own realities, and we share a lot, and then there's a lot that it takes a huge amount of effort to see someone else's point of view, obviously.
Yes. Ann-Marie, thank you for putting this question. I think it's such a great question for us to be reflecting upon. And I really feel that one of the things that I would say that is, because I think we're all in that experience of watching people and witnessing others at different points in their process. And what I would encourage us to do is to recognize that denial is a part of the process, whatever it is, that we are always in process of our awakening, whatever that is. And so I find that sometimes accepting that the person is and seeing that everybody is where they need to be, that is perfect for them, helps in those moments. Because the other part too is asking ourselves, what is it bringing out of us? So, for example, if I'm witnessing somebody who is in a state of denial of something, am I at peace with that, of where they are in their process, or am I being triggered in different ways? So if I'm being triggered in different ways, well, then that's the first order of business to address for myself, that not including them in my own process. But then once that is addressed, doing exactly what Preston and Betsy were talking about, is meeting them where they are and honoring their process and asking questions that are coming from that supportive and encouraging space. That would be my reflections, at least today, on it. But I think we should keep that going because, that I think there's a readiness factor too of that, sometimes, I ask for accountability partners of, well, if you see me in denial, you have my permission to bring it to my attention. But if we don't have that permission, we have to ask ourselves, well, what is that next step? But if I don't have permission, then, can I just let this person be where they are? But maybe I can ask a question that will help them and hopefully support them in the process.
Mm-hmm.
So any other thoughts?
I think if we don't have another
you are
question,
okay right now. Yep.
It brings to mind that idea of all this polarization, and it brings to mind just the practice that's hard to get into of crossing the aisle or whatever you want to call it. I remember when my dad had dementia, and I would suggest something and he'd be like, no way. And I would just eventually learned to go and sort of either mentally or physically sit on the couch with him and basically say, oh yeah, this isn't right. How do we get on someone else's team? Is there something that we can sit on the couch with the other person and find some common ground and go from there, I guess. But it is, also reminds me of the coming together of the conscious and the unconscious, and being willing to look, being curious, and being willing to try on new things, to see where does that reality live in me? Because I do believe if you can see it, you can be it. So when we have people in our midst who have such different points of view than we do, is there a place in me that can
I know that for me, the place in me is I want to be a denier.
right.
I
There's
want
the jealousy. Yeah.
I want to
Please.
believe that this isn't happening. And even having events like this is sort of a mild form of it. It's sort of saying we are wishful for this reality where we don't need to have social distancing. We don't need to have all the precautions for a pandemic. Why do we not have a real Jung Society meeting right now? Why are we doing this instead? Well, this is a step toward normalcy, whatever that is. This is a step towards a reality. Are we denying this pandemic by having this meeting? I don't know. There's a part of me that's kind of going, pandemic, go away. We still have the Jung Society to do. So I just want to acknowledge that part of me that's like, man, I want to deny it too.
For sure. For
Well,
sure.
Like we were saying earlier, it is part of the process. You know what I mean? Like it's a very natural aspect of coping, as we try to navigate through, like, and what we were saying earlier about there. I mean, when we are smacked with so much change and so much unknown, it's a very natural coping mechanism to search for some level of familiarity. And I feel like, it's something where we have to find the balance for ourselves of if we need to do something that that feels safe, but like provides a sense of normalcy, then so be it, right? Like that's a healthy, I would think like that's a healthy way to navigate our ways through so much change. However, though, there is the level of respecting, the realities that are at play, and why we're doing this virtually versus in person. It's like, okay, let's kind of find that happy medium of like what would be a safe way of bringing some level of normalcy to it. But what I do love is owning it. And I think that that's a very, very powerful part of the process when we can just say, Yep, that was a real thing. And and then adding to the conversation, when having people in our lives that may be in denial along the way, I do find that us owning our own processes and role modeling how we can be and how it can be an option to live and it be okay to accept the fact that we can be in denial and then start to explore those aspects of ourselves. I do believe that has a very positive effect on our community, on those around us, right? Like that's something that can happen. I mean, you have to practice that that detachment in that, it may not have an effect, right? But I do believe that it has the potential to. So Preston, thank you for role modeling for me right now. You're like, yeah, no, I for sure have been in denial. I was one of those people too, where I was like, well, we can postpone, but it'll probably be just for like a month,
Yeah.
And then I remember getting like the message back, Jen, I don't think this is going to be gone in a month. And it was like,
Yeah. The whole 6 months been, I was working full time, and while there were plenty of changes to my job and to, all the procedures that we needed to do, and not doing anything except going to work and coming home, I stayed in my routine, and I stayed fairly cheerful, and a lot of denial, I think. And the same, not just with COVID, but facing my own understanding about race and racism and taking that to new levels, and learning, being open to, so much that is not new information, but really trying to take advantage of, soak in the processes and the perspectives, to take myself to a new level with that. This is ongoing work for good. We're gonna have to keep doing this stuff. We're never gonna be 100% conscious. We're not gonna solve all these problems. We're all so different, and all approaching all of the questions from so many different perspectives.
So Anna Maria is taking us even deeper, which
Okay,
I am loving. So she said thank you, and she said, just piggybacking on our comments so far, what about when denial causes harm or danger? How does activism tie in? I love this question.
Right. Isn't there the saying that my freedom to punch the air ends at your nose or something like that? So can you repeat the question one more time?
Absolutely. What about when denial causes harm or danger? How does activism tie in?
I feel like it's two separate aspects here. So activism is its own thing. If you want to be an activist against people's denial, that's on you, but I don't think that's the right tool for this kind of job. When someone is in denial in a way that is harmful, you should express to them how you feel as calmly as you can, because the more you fight, the more it becomes like a Chinese finger trap. The more you pull and fight it, the tighter it's going to get, and you can't. So expressing your feelings, acknowledging their feelings, try to get to the root of why they feel the way that they do, because they may have something deep inside of them that they feel you are damaging. So a lot of people who are in denial or don't want to wear masks feel that we're impinging on their freedom. And we have the saying in this country, give me liberty or give me death, and people take it literally. And yes, you could say that they're being dumb, and what if they get it, and then they'll feel different if they got it, and someone dies. Well, some people really believe that having that personal autonomy is more important, and that you are harming them by forcing them to live the way you feel they need to live. So that's why on the other side, people who deny, the people who don't want to wear masks, the people who are using their own activism and their own vigilante justice to tell others who are impinging on their freedom, no, you're hurting me. Just like you feel when they're not wearing a mask, you denier, you're hurting me. So we need to have deep empathy. It is so difficult to have that deep empathy for someone who you disagree with. But try to find that place. Try to find where their fears are and their experiences, and try to find what their morality is, because they're probably not a bad person. They just have different ideas of morality than you do. Explore it. Try to figure out, maybe there's something I am missing here. Maybe I am hurting these other people, and I don't even realize I'm hurting these people. You're hurting the deniers with you keep saying over and over again, there's this disease, we have to take action. We have to impinge on your freedom because you could hurt me.
Yeah. The two things that come to mind for me, the first one is like quick retreat and protect myself. Just got to say. And I've been in that situation a couple of times in the last 6 months where it's very clear the person that I was in the room with was not concerned about wearing a mask or spreading the virus. So that was my, immediate physical response was to make sure that I was protected. And one other thing that I would just add right along the same lines, Preston, is to share from the heart the vulnerability, the fear. I am afraid that I will get sick. I am afraid that I will take COVID to people I love. I don't want to spread it anywhere. Maybe sharing from the heart, finding some common ground with that person about how would it feel. I've been very, very lucky. I know some people who've had it. I don't know anyone who's died of it. But obviously, hundreds of thousands of people have died. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest, this is really tough. And in regards to having an answer, and I'll just be honest, I don't have an answer other than what comes up for me in my reflections is when it comes to harm, I come back to respectful boundaries. And so respect for ourselves, like first and foremost, of like understanding like what are we okay with, and where is there a line that we are just not okay with it being crossed, and how do we navigate having those boundaries. And when it comes to activism, I think that it's a different definition for everybody. Some feel very called to get involved in movements, like we're seeing now. Some are, and in that regard, that would be in regards to government conversations, and throughout the course of the world, we operate differently, right? So it's going to look differently depending on where you are. And so what I would say is that it comes down to, again, this understanding of our own individual story within it, and what can we do that we feel comfortable with, without, if we're going to be putting ourselves in danger, only you can choose if you're okay with that or not. I mean, you can't have somebody else tell you, it's like, that's something that's like our own personal choices of what we do actively. One of my observations in the world is that I do believe that we all are called to some cause usually, some of us, but we're all unique, and we all have different causes that we feel very called to and drawn to. And if that call is within us, then I think it's very healthy to follow that, and to follow where it leads us of providing, hopefully some level of, I love to use like positive, sustainable change, in the comments of things. It's from a social change model that I studied at one point. But with that being said, in that, I do actually recommend, if you're interested, to research the social change model. Like because it starts with the individual, and then goes to the collective. And it's like the different levels of activism that comes with that. And I think that may be a great tool for us to look at as an option. No pressure, of course, only if you feel comfortable with that or drawn to it. But I think that at the end of the day, when there is harm, we are making the judgment call of, okay, if there's something like, what do we feel comfortable with doing when it comes to the doing? I think that, always feel called to always double check with myself first and foremost of asking, am I coming from a space of groundedness and peace, or am I reacting? If I'm reacting, then I try to practice compassion for myself, right? Sometimes that is just part of the process, but can I get to a space of responding? And I think that was something that I did want to bring up in conversation. And I think that it piggybacks off of this is understanding for ourselves the difference between reacting and responding. And so I think that is like, especially when witnessing something harmful, sometimes there's the fight or flight, right? Like you're going to do something. It depends, I guess, on the degree of harm that you're witnessing. But then as we shift away from the survival mechanisms to more the reflective aspects of things, we have this opportunity to reflect upon, okay, what is going to be a response that will provide the opportunity for what I would love to see happen. So I would love to pose that. We're just as a time check, we're at 6:07, so we have made it through the hour, so probably should be coming to a conclusion. But please feel free, everybody, if you want to keep the conversation going, of course, add in. We were thinking about an hour, possibly hour and a half, so want to put that out there. But to continuing the conversation about this, our abilities to respond and thoughts on that with Carl Jung's work.
Carl Jung.
Mm-hmm.
I was actually beginning to think, some more again about the idea of activism and activism around racism and systemic racism, and the importance of starting where we are and really doing our work before we attempt to I guess suggest to anyone else what they need to do. It's such a complicated problem, issue, so entrenched, so old, so fraught. And I do think of myself as an activist. Part of the reason that I wanted our community to get together now is because I felt like Carl Jung had so much to say, maybe not so much about race and racism. We could say a lot more about that, but the tools are here. Jung gave us ways of looking at ourselves, looking at the world in ways that we can take responsibility for our choices, our perspectives. We can learn and grow. We can change if we're willing to bring more things into consciousness. Try on perspectives we never knew existed, or we never thought we could possibly agree with them, and bring those into consciousness, check them out, and grow and learn. So it was really important to me, and it took 5 months at least, right, for us to be like, okay. A lot of Jungian analysts and presenters were reflecting. They were being quiet. Good idea. We all were. I'd felt as an organization, particularly in Charleston, and the board felt that now maybe we could start a conversation, and that it's critical to keep the conversation going. Again, we don't have a lot of answers, but we sure do welcome your feedback. I'm going to go ahead and wrap up unless there are some other.
Yeah, I just wanted
Please.
One last little bit was, I think because we're such a society of doers, we always want to react immediately in the moment because we have to do something. We have to do something.
Yeah.
And maybe we should take a minute, like you were saying with the Jungian analyst, reflect, take more of a Taoist perspective of, do everything without doing. Let it happen. Let the world unfold before you. And when the energy rises up in you to go and do something, to honor that energy and to go and do it then. But instead of right now, always having to do something, that tends to lead us into paths we don't want to go down. So
Yeah. I remember at least a couple of times when I was like, what do you think, guys? Are we ready to? And no. And I knew that was right. I feel like it was good timing for tonight. I do want to say that Dr. Fanny Brewster is speaking online next Saturday night. And I meant to have all of the details right here, but she is part of an event being conducted by the Atlanta Jung Society. And just Google it. And I will be there listening, and I welcome everyone to do that as well. I'm going to, I have some resources to share, and I think both of you do as well. And so we'll get those added to the notes on this YouTube channel. And just want to say thank you again for joining us, and
Appreciate it.
Thanks.
Stay well
Thank
and
you
good
for
night.
being with us this
Yeah.
evening, coming to you from Gage Hall,
We miss you.
our spot that we usually are in. And even though we're not in person, we want you to know we feel very connected with you. So if we, let's stay in touch as we can, and we'll continue to evolve as a society as we are called to do.
And give us your ideas for
Mhm.
feedback, for ideas for other programs, topics. Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone.
Good night.
Bye.